All right, everyone, welcome back to GDC 2022. I'm Jim Schultz. I'm the head of community at Incredibuild, and we are continuing to talk to more very fun and interesting people here at the conference. And Sergei, thank you for joining us. Sergei is with Bethesda. Would you like to introduce yourself, who you are, what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Sergei Savchenko, and I work at Bethesda Game Studios in Montreal. So we have several locations in North America. Our headquarters is in Rockville, Maryland, and I'm based in Montreal, up north. So I'm a technical lead at the studio. I work a lot on profiling, optimization, low-level stuff on various platforms, doing this kind of work.
Very cool. I actually get to go to Montreal in May for the first time in my life.
Oh, yeah?
So I'll have to hit you up for some nice places to eat. Okay, cool.
Nice food scene, a lot of different things to see.
And it'll be nice weather in May, right? You promise?
Yeah. No, May is nice. If you hit May just before August, you're good.
Okay, perfect. So you gave a talk here at the conference a couple of days ago, and the talk was titled Human Perception of Motion and Animation. Mm-hmm. Sounds super fascinating, and I think it's going to be in the vault for GDC, so I'll put the link in the description here for everybody to watch. Can you just give us a summary? What was the talk about? What were some of the high points and takeaways?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, the talk is about human perceptions of motion and animation. In fact, I did a talk last year at virtual GDC, which was also about human perception, but of kind of static stimuli, of colors, of different things like shadows, specular highlights, and so on. And so this year, it's a bit of a sort of follow-up on that talk, specifically focusing on things like motion and animation. So, the reason, it's an interesting topic for me personally, but also kind of relevant for game development, because due to how kind of our visual system is built, sometimes we as humans would perceive motion where there's no motion. So for instance, we can be looking at some static stimuli. There's, for instance, this thing called peripheral drift illusion, where there's like 6 static circles with particular color gradients, and you would observe in your peripheral vision, you will see a bit of motion. And conversely, sometimes we would completely miss something huge moving in front of your eyes. Like for instance, there is this famous experiment called the gorilla experiment, where observers are asked to count how many times the ball is being passed between some players. And while doing it, there's like somebody in a gorilla suit walks in the middle of the room, and basically participants of that experiment would completely miss that had happened. So why is it important for us as game development? Well, sometimes we can produce things that would have those unwanted artifacts, where we would see like shimmering or other different things which were not intended. Or we can be spending a lot of time simulating something, kind of rendering something, and it would go completely unnoticed. Our players would not see that. So that obviously those are the kind of problems that I try to describe and give a bit of a clues how to deal with them. But then again, the talk is not necessarily prescriptive. It's more explaining how human visual system is dealing with those things, like basically perceiving motion, perceiving animation, and things like that.
Does it deal with as well, like that perceiving motion and recognizing it as real or animated? You know what I mean? Like we know what a human face looks like. We know what it looks like when somebody walks and jumps and things.
Yeah.
And is that all related in part of the same topic?
Yeah, well, in fact, we have, funny that you mentioned face recognition. So we have a particular area in the brain called fusiform gyrus, which is specifically for face recognition. But the interesting thing about it is that we can recognize faces in our normal orientations. It's like our ability to recognize face when it's, let's say, inverted is much worse. A very similar thing is happening with motion animation. We can recognize biological movement by like point light displays, essentially just bright contrast points moving. That's sufficient for us to see somebody moving. But if you put it in untypical orientation, like inverted, for instance, our perception, ability to recognize what it is much worse. You might perceive it as if it's like some shape rotating, while if you put it in normal orientation, you will see a person walking, for instance. So yeah.
Very fascinating. How did you get into this? Just curious too. That it's a very specific field in gaming.
Well, I mean, I worked obviously as a rendering programmer, as somebody dealing with performance, and oftentimes you have those conversations like, oh, we absolutely need to do something, like this is not how radiance transfer is happening in real life, and we absolutely have to invest into that. And you ask, but why? What is it going to do to our players? Like, yeah, they'll see the difference. And oftentimes when we test it, people completely miss the difference. So you start asking ourselves, like, why are we doing it? Do we need to invest into everything that we'd like? And to be clear, certainly a lot of investments that are being made for light matter interaction, global illumination, they do have solid base, and we do pay attention to certain clues, but not everything. Like, for instance, we perceive lighting oftentimes as, like, we split the scene, the way we perceive it, into areas where to our brain lighting is primarily either constant or smoothly changing, and certain elements of it, like if we simulate things like color bleeding or some other things, it may not be as apparent, and people may not pay attention to that. So the question is, what do we invest in and what do we not invest in?
Right. It kind of seems like the much higher tech version of like what they used to do with matte paintings, or they still do in some cases, right? With films, where they would paint a background where it would look realistic enough.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a real background, or even in 3D, do we have to animate a 3D background all the way back from miles away, or can we just have a matte painting?
Yeah, and especially these days, there are some very efficient rendering techniques, like for instance, reprojection techniques, where element of a prior frame is being heavily reused. It's not strictly geometrically correct because obviously we did not project every single vertex to a proper position in the world, but it doesn't matter because it actually in some ways better for our perception because that transformation is smoother, there's less artifacts potentially. And it's a huge saving in terms of performance, and we're able to oftentimes run at 60 FPS versus 30 FPS by doing those techniques, which heavily reuse prior computations.
That's very, very fascinating. So yeah, you're cheating a little bit, but the cheating makes it look more real, even though it's technically not as real.
Yeah, well, but
it's this weird balance.
Exactly, what is real?
Right.
As long as our players are happy and they feel that it's real, that's what matters.
Yes, if I think, therefore I am. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all that. I'm gonna put the link into the description of the video for everybody, so we can watch the video. I'm gonna go back and watch it too. But one more question for you, not related to Elder Scrolls, I promise. My son told me to ask you. Gaming memories. I'd love to hear one of your favorite gaming memories, and this can be from way back in the day growing up, or it can be recent too.
Yeah. Well, I have many, but especially coming to San Francisco, what kind of comes back to my mind. So I lived here for a couple of years. I started at 3DO before its untimely demise, so that was like 23, 24 years ago. And that was during the transition from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2. And the game that we played extremely heavily was SSX. That was probably the best launch title for PS2 at the time. So we played it a lot. We played it kind of on the couch with several people playing at the same time. I played it a lot by myself. It's like really everybody was so impressed by that we wanted to do something similar, right? So at 3DO we started a game, really as a result of us all enjoying what we were doing, started a game that was called Johnny Mosley Mad Tricks, which was like similar, like snow sports racing game, but it was on skis rather than on a snowboard. And as things go in this industry, like about 5-6 years later, I ended up working on this SSX, and then a lot of things come back to you. It's like, oh, I like that game so much, and I was so impressed by it, and now I know, I know what they've done and how they've done it. So that was kind of very interesting, kind of both as a player and as somebody who does games. It was very interesting to see that kind of looking at something, liking it so much, and then some years later understanding how exactly they've done it. So that's really cool.
Very cool. Well, Sergei, thank you so much for spending time with us here today. I'm definitely going to look you up when I head out to Montreal in a few months.
Yeah,
and yeah, if you come out, I'll buy a drink. Awesome.
I'll take care of that.
Even better. I'll definitely call you. Thank you, Sergei.
Thank you so much.